important that we have a broader understanding of lecturer workplace exposure or experience than what previously has been thought. There's this notion that a 5-day placement in industry is lecturer workplace exposure, but it's much more than that. And we need to broaden that understanding, especially if we want to fit in with the college system and how things work in colleges. So what we're saying is that it's not just a once-off thing. You don't just send your people out and then it's done. It's a continuous process, and it's cumulative. Each time a lecturer goes into industry for something, their next exposure builds on that. It's based on what they've learned, what they've seen, what they've done, the employers they've met. It includes periodic placements, but it also includes other kinds of engagements. We're saying they're on-site engagements, so it's at the employer's place of work. And it can be various lengths. It can be a half a day. A half a day can be a legitimate exposure for a lecturer. We're not saying that they only need half a day ever, but that half day then builds into 1 day. It then builds into 5 days, and it's back to a half a day. So that's the way it works. So we're looking at things like workplace excursions. These can be very, very useful for lecturers who haven't had much industry experience, and they're still trying to figure out what the environment is like. Who are the employers out there? If we wanted to do a placement in an employer, which one would be a useful one? Where could we learn the things we wanted to learn? So through workplace excursions, you can learn that. Meetings in the workplace, even meetings where you've gone in to check out a workplace to host students for WBE, where you'll get taken to see the shop floor, you'll sit with the production manager or the factory manager and talk about the kinds of activities students could engage in, how the whole thing could work. There's a discussion about lecturer workplace exposure. All of this is the beginning. It's the first level of exposure for that lecturer, getting to know the employer, getting to know the possibilities there. Orientation and induction sessions. This program that Melanie was talking about with Woolworths, that was a structured orientation. It was a 5-day orientation for lecturers into the retail industry, and it included lectures for lecturers on different departments, that they were taken on visits to distribution centers. But some companies run a 1-day induction session for their own staff, like the City of Cape Town. It's a big municipality, so they have these induction sessions where they introduce people to all the different departments and structures and systems, and so those things are useful as well. Then we're talking about structured monitoring of students. So, Melanie talked about how FalseBay is tying the WBE and the LWE together. But when your lecturers are going out to go and see students in the workplace and monitor them and meet with employers, that is giving them an opportunity to get to know the employers that host their students, the workplaces, the work those students are doing. We say structured because for us, if we're building this into this being valid and legitimate and counting towards professional qualifications, it needs to have a structure where there would be reporting, there's evidence kept of that, and there's reflections on it. So all of that would need to be in place to make it valid. And then, of course, there's a placement. There's a placement in a workplace. It can be for even half a day, where you could go into one section to do one thing. It could be 1 day, 2 days, 5 days. It could be a month. SSACI is looking at trying to introduce exchanges between colleges in South Africa and some in Switzerland, where it could be 3 months. So it doesn't have to just be the same shape. We've got to think about this more broadly, and depending on how long you are in a workplace, you can't do very much in 1 day or half a day, but you're there for a month, you can start actually practically engaging in a more meaningful way. So the more time, the more opportunity there is for actual engagement and learning. The less time, it's more observation and exploration. So, and then there's the training in a workplace that Mari was talking about. There is a difference, though, just between sending somebody to go and do training on Microsoft Word or some program versus actually training in a workplace environment on workplace machinery though. So we just need to be clear about that. Basically, the type, the length should be suitable for the purpose. Fit for purpose is the most important thing here. It's about being clear about what you want to do and then what is the best sort of engagement to get there. Finally here, just in terms of our understanding that this needs to be seen as an element of the professional qualification framework as well, that whatever we're doing must build into that and into continuing professional development system. So just then to sum up, how are we starting to think about this from our initial research and work with colleges? What we're saying is when we're looking at types of LWE, we're really broadly looking at three kinds here. We're saying there's type 1, which is exploratory orientation focused, where it might be for half a day to 1 day, these excursions, inductions, structured monitoring of students, very focused observations where you're going into the accounting department to go and have a look at a particular thing that's happening there. Or practical engagement. It might be that you already have a relationship with this company. They know and trust you. They've done training. Now you go in for half a day to go and work on one machine. So there's that sort of arrangement. Short placements, which are exposure focused. So we're looking at sort of 2 to 5 days where you're going to go and do a number of those things. You can go to meetings. You could maybe, even if they're students in the workplace, you could see there might be an orientation session you'd go to. And then finally, the longer placements, which are more skills development, practice-oriented type placements, where the lecturers are there long enough to get more involved in the actual activities of the workplace and start working on things. So those are the kinds of LWE we're thinking about. And then just finally, just to run you through some guiding principles. I know we've run a little bit over on the presentation, so I'll try and go through these quickly. But firstly, I've said this at the beginning and I'm saying it again, it's a continuous process of lecturer development. Very importantly, it needs to be, if it's going to be of value, we need to integrate what is being learned back into the classroom. Melanie and Mari gave examples of how they're doing it, ways that they can see this happening. So that's very important. The lecturers need support to do this. I think in the past there has been this idea that lecturers would just do it in their own time, that they would organize their own, placements and exposure and in their holidays, and it didn't really happen that they did it. So if we want them to do it, we need to find a way of building it into the system so that it's actually part of their work, part of their development. And recognition for their achievements. I mean, my hope is that we will eventually have a professional development system for TVET lecturers where we even have a point system. Lecturers can start building up points for doing things like this. That very importantly, it does need to produce benefits for everybody, even the employers. And it may not always be so obvious what the benefits are for the employers, but we need to find ways of making those benefits real. And they are benefits. And it's more than just the employer doing a good thing by helping colleges. So we need to be looking at making those benefits there and building them in for employers as well. Needs to be based on a lecturer's needs. And it's already been, I think Melanie made the point about tying it to what they teach. It's driven by what that lecturer is teaching, and it needs to be, if the lecturer is just sent on some generic program, it's got to be determined by what they need. It'll be more valuable for them if it is. A one-size-fits-all approach should not be followed. Like this idea of a 5-day placement and everybody, whether you're a maths teacher or somebody who's teaching fitting and turning, goes for 5 days. Doesn't work the same way for everybody. So each engagement should fit its purpose. Good planning, I won't label this, we've all said a lot of it. Very importantly, number 8, each lecturer should take responsibility for their own LWE to ensure that it meets their needs and is most beneficial. It has to be driven by lecturers. They have to take ownership of this. It's their own personal development. if it's going to be valuable for them, they need to understand how to make it so. The match between the employer and the lecturer, important. It should not disrupt teaching. Well, that we take as a given, so we've got to find a way of doing it so it doesn't. The tie between student WBE and the lecturer, the LWE, is a good thing from a management point of view as well, because you have to manage the whole student program. So if you bring your lecturers in to be part of that, it helps with the management of the student program, and it helps to tie the whole thing together. So you don't have two different units in your college. One's doing students and one's doing lecturers. Rather work together. The partnerships, building employer partnerships. We are putting a lot of pressure on employers at the moment. We're saying, take our students, take our lecturers, take the university students. This can only work if we actually build solid partnerships with our employers, and we really start looking at building in benefits for them as well. And then ultimately, this is also only going to work if we have the support of senior college management. It's got to be driven from in the college. And hearing Mari talk about Khatsebande, the one thing I've learned from Khatsebande is it comes from the CEO. He says this is how it's going to be, and it must be that. The targets are set. False Bay College, another college that's been succeeding, it's coming from the CEO. And underneath those two CEOs, their deputy academics are pushing this. So it's got to be coming from the top, again, otherwise it's not going to succeed. So thank you very much. That is the end for me, but I'm going to just very quickly, it's another 30 seconds, 3 minutes, 10 seconds. Melanie's just going to take us through photos, and then Mari.
Very, very quickly. One of the spin-offs has been, when we're looking for lecturer placement, and specifically in the hospitality department, we're always thinking of going to hotels, but what we started to do was approach some of our suppliers. And a wonderful spin-off for us was that some of our suppliers, Spice Mecca being one of them, and Snowflake, took our students and our lecturers and used them as the demonstrators at the Good Food and Wine Show. And this was a phenomenal experience for our hospitality students. So these are our students and one of our lecturers at the Good Food and Wine Show. The gentleman with the Springbok t-shirt on is one of our lecturers, and they were then able to do a cooking demonstration, sort of food channel style, in front of a whole audience, and the students were able to then show their skills at the Good Food and Wine Show. The executive chef then asked the audience questions, and people were allowed to ask them questions. They explained their dishes, and you can see it was a phenomenal experience for both students and staff. And that's the end result, which was delicious. I did get to taste it. And then for Khatsebande, these were the...
Sorry, this is the lecturers. We actually couldn't get them a photo of them in the editing department. But this was fundamental lecturers and an IT lecturer visiting a newspaper. And they were working in the editing department, and the IT lecturer was exposed to the web page designing section. And it was very interesting, the comments of these lecturers coming back of the importance of good language. And they are the ones that next we want to go to industry to see how important is good language and editing and all these things in industry. And now they have get all the others to also go. The next two is just lecturers that are busy with training in the Buscore Training Center in Nelspruit, the automotive repair lecturers.
It's correct, we need to give guidelines. But as you know, we don't have the capacity in the DHET to deal with this particular portfolio. The DHET created a chief directorate called Work Integrated Learning, for want of a better, portfolio description. And currently, it was a one-man show. We had one chief director, and that was the beginning and the end of the story. Now the one man is not even there. Somebody is acting in that position and trying to manage a whole lot of other things. So that just illustrates that in the department there isn't the capacity to firmly drive that. But it remains on the agenda as a very key output. Now to that extent, we are still chipping away at it systematically. If you look at where it started off with student placements. And we have made many inroads in that regard, even though the structure of the college hasn't changed fundamentally. And there hasn't been any significant amount of funding. There have largely been initiatives and projects. That's how it has taken off. But it does have a presence in colleges at the moment. If we cast our minds back to 5 years ago, this wasn't happening to any measure at all. Or maybe just a select few colleges were doing it. Now it's pretty much happening in just about every college to different measures. You know, it's highly varied, there's no uniformity about, but it's happening, which means the idea has been embraced by colleges that this is what has to be done. Now, off the back of that experience, SSACI again, we see them as our key stakeholders with the core competency to do this. Now, when they launched this project about 3 to 4 years ago, taking the workbooks into colleges, and every college has been workshopped on that, am I right? SSACI came and did those workshops. That was our attempt with our partners to bring that kind of experience and expertise into the colleges. They did that over a 2-year period. Now, following from that, what is very current, it's almost concluded, is the framework and the guideline for student placements in work-integrated learning. And that process now has to be synchronized with the departmental process of what you raised, Brian, or Keith, ensuring that the terminology is correct, is uniform. There was a separate internal process in the department to make sure the way we report on it, for the very reasons that Keith mentioned, is accurate, because we report at different levels to different constituencies. The figures we give must mean something. They must be defensible. So there was that process in the department, and that's exactly what SSACI is doing now, aligning that document with the guidelines and the implementation document for student work placements. Now, we have only started with the lecturer. It was so complex that it was too much to handle both at one time. So the priority was given to the student placements to systematically embed that in colleges and for us to be able to drive that process with the key partner. Now that we feel we've made sufficient inroads and we can deliver something, that framework should be signed off within the next quarter, and then it becomes, and some provinces have already been workshopped. Limpopo has been used as a pilot to workshop that. So there is work in progress. This is the start of work-integrated learning for lecturers. And as Vanessa said, it can't stand on its own. Currently, we must integrate it with what work-integrated learning is about in the lecturer qualifications policy, which Dr. Green has spoken about previously in our previous seminar, but he will build on that tomorrow when he speaks, and he speaks to actual qualifications being developed currently by universities to address, to be responsive to that policy. So it is being done systematically. It's just that we are not where you want it to be. And we can't just dish out something that hasn't been run sufficiently in the field. You can see all these experiences come from a field experience. Lastly, I want to say is there has been a job description formulated for a work-integrated learning officer in a college as a position in a college. It's a job description, I would call it. That comes from the Labor Relations Unit. But colleagues, I don't want to tell you that that is what you're going to get in your colleges come next term or next year, because it is everything is dependent on the funding. If we cannot secure the funding for another person at that level in the college, it is not going to happen. We can have all the paperwork, all the frameworks and what have you for such a person. Recognize the need, it's not going to happen. But what I'm saying is in the department, it is under consideration, and there are attempts to entrench it in the normal structure of the colleges. Thank you.